I met Daniel when I was 29 years old at a bookstore in Portland. He was reaching for the same copy of a Raymond Carver collection that I'd had my eye on, and when our hands touched, he smiled at me with this warm, easy confidence that made my heart skip. He let me take the book. Then he asked if I wanted to get coffee and talk about it. We were married 18 months later. For the first 7 years, our marriage was everything I'd hoped for. Daniel worked as an architect. I was climbing the ranks at a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. We bought a little craftsman bungalow with a garden out back. We traveled when we could. We talked about having kids someday when the timing was right. We were building a life together, brick by brick, and I loved him more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Then, in the spring of 2017, things started to change. It began with small things. Daniel would forget where he'd put his keys, which wasn't unusual. Everyone forgets sometimes. But then he started forgetting appointments. He'd miss meetings at work, show up at the wrong restaurant for dinner reservations. One evening, he called me from the grocery store, confused about what he'd gone there to buy. His voice sounded thin and uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "I don't know what's happening," he said. I can't remember why I came here." I told him it was okay, that everyone has off days, that he should just come home. But a cold knot of worry had formed in my stomach. Over the next few months, the incidents multiplied. Daniel would start a sentence and trail off, unable to find the words he needed. He'd repeat the same story to me twice in one evening, not remembering he'd already told it. He began having trouble with tasks that had always been second nature to him, balancing the checkbook, following a recipe, finding his way to places he'd been dozens of times. I made an appointment with our family doctor, Dr. Nguyen. She ran a battery of tests: blood work, cognitive assessments, and MRI. When the results came back, she referred us to a neurologist. Dr. Richard Kemper was in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that somehow made the terrible news feel almost bearable. After more tests, more questions, more waiting, he delivered his diagnosis on a gray afternoon in October. Early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Aggressive progression. Daniel was only 39 years old. I remember sitting in that office, holding Daniel's hand, feeling like the floor had opened up beneath me. Dr. Kemper was talking about treatment options, clinical trials, support groups, but his words seemed to come from very far away. I looked at Daniel, and he looked back at me with this lost, frightened expression that broke my heart into pieces. "How long?" I managed to ask. Dr. Kemper's face was grave. "It's difficult to say. Every case is different. But given the rate of decline we've already observed, you should prepare for significant changes over the next 2 to 3 years." The drive home was silent except for the sound of rain on the windshield. When we got inside, Daniel sat down on the couch and stared at his hands for a long time. Then he looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Claire." I sat beside him and held him while he cried. "We're going to get through this," I told him, even though I had no idea if that was true.
Together.
"We're going to face this together." And for a while, I believed that's what we were doing. The decline was steady and relentless. Within 6 months, Daniel had to stop working. His firm was understanding, supportive even, but he could no longer handle the complex spatial reasoning his job required. He'd started drawing and forget what building he was designing. He'd show up at the office and not remember why he was there. I cut back my hours at work to help him manage. We established routines, systems. I made lists for everything, labeled drawers and cabinets, set up reminders on his phone. But the disease seemed to move faster than our ability to adapt to it. By the summer of 2018, a year after the diagnosis, Daniel needed help with basic daily tasks. I'd lay out his clothes in the morning, I'd remind him to take his medications, a cocktail of drugs that were supposed to slow the progression but didn't seem to be doing much. I'd guide him through meals because sometimes he'd forget what a fork was for or lose track of whether he'd eaten. The person I'd married was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I quit my job in September. It wasn't really a choice. Daniel couldn't be left alone anymore. He'd wander out of the house and get lost. He'd leave the stove on. Once, I came home from a quick trip to the pharmacy and found him standing in the backyard in his pajamas, crying because he couldn't remember how to get back inside. My boss was sympathetic but firm. I couldn't work remotely and care for Daniel full-time. I had to choose. So I chose Daniel. Of course I chose Daniel. Our savings started to dwindle. Daniel's disability insurance helped, but it didn't cover everything. The medications were expensive. The adult daycare program we tried for a while was expensive. The in-home health aide, who came twice a week, was expensive. I watched our bank account shrink month by month and felt a creeping sense of panic that I tried very hard to hide. My friends stopped calling as much. Not because they didn't care, I think, but because they didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone whose husband is disappearing before her eyes? People would ask how I was doing, and I'd say, fine, and they'd look relieved not to have to dig deeper. My mother lived across the country and was dealing with her own health issues. Daniel's parents had both passed away years earlier. We were alone in this, Daniel and I, locked together in a nightmare that only seemed to get worse. By 2019, Daniel could barely hold a conversation. He'd look at me sometimes with no recognition in his eyes, as if I were a stranger. Other times, he'd seem almost like his old self for a few minutes, lucid and present, and I'd feel a wild surge of hope, only to watch him slip away again moments later. Dr. Kemper adjusted his medications. We tried different combinations, different dosages. Nothing seemed to help. The progression was relentless. I was exhausted all the time, bone-deep tired in a way I'd never experienced before. I'd fall into bed at night and lie awake, listening to Daniel's breathing, wondering how much more I could take. Then I'd feel guilty for even thinking that way. This wasn't his fault. He was sick. I was supposed to be strong for both of us. But God, I was so tired. In the fall of 2019, something shifted. Nothing I could name exactly, just a feeling that something was off. Daniel had good days and bad days, which was normal, but the pattern started to feel strange. He'd be utterly confused and helpless in the morning, then oddly functional in the evening. He'd forget my name, then remember complex details about things that had happened months ago. I mentioned it to Dr. Kemper at one of our appointments. He said it wasn't unusual for Alzheimer's patients to have fluctuating symptoms, especially in the middle stages. Sundowning, he called it, though that didn't quite match what I was seeing. I tried to push the unease away. I was just tired, I told myself. Overthinking things because I was stressed and scared and desperately looking for patterns where there were none. Then, in December, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I'd gone out to do the grocery shopping on a Sunday morning, leaving Daniel asleep in bed. I'd been gone maybe 90 minutes. When I came back, arms full of bags, I found him in the kitchen making coffee. That in itself wasn't remarkable. He still had moments of clarity where he could perform simple tasks. But something about the scene felt wrong. The coffee maker was one of those complicated espresso machines that Daniel had loved before he got sick, with all sorts of buttons and settings. He'd been unable to use it for over a year. Yet there he was, making a perfect cappuccino. "Daniel," I said, setting down the groceries. He turned and looked at me with that foggy, uncertain expression I'd grown so used to.
"Claire,
"You're back." I was just... He trailed off, looking down at the cup in his hand as if surprised to find it there. Was I making coffee? "Yes," I said slowly. You were. I don't remember how to make coffee, he said, and he sounded genuinely confused. But he'd just done it. I'd seen him. The machine was still warm, steaming milk in the pitcher, a perfect design in the foam. It's okay, I said, taking the cup from him. Maybe it's muscle memory or something. He nodded vaguely and wandered back toward the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen, looking at that perfect cappuccino, feeling the first whisper of something that might have been doubt. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small things. Drawers that had been opened and closed when I knew I'd left them shut. Food missing from the refrigerator that Daniel claimed he hadn't touched, and he shouldn't have been able to prepare for himself anyway. The television left on channels he'd never watched before. Once, I came home from a doctor's appointment of my own to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a pen in his hand, a notebook open in front of him. When he saw me, he quickly closed it and pushed it aside, that confused expression sliding over his face like a mask. What were you doing? I asked. I don't know, he said. I found this notebook. I don't know what it is. I picked it up and flipped through it. The pages were blank. These incidents were small, easily dismissed. I was tired, I told myself. I was seeing things that weren't there, or forgetting things I'd done myself, or misinterpreting normal behaviors. Daniel was sick. That was the reality. Everything else was just noise. But the feeling of wrongness grew. In January 2020, Daniel's brother called from Seattle. We hadn't heard from Marcus in months. He distanced himself from us after the diagnosis, unable to cope with what was happening to Daniel. But now he wanted to visit, to see his brother before things got worse. I told him that would be wonderful. Daniel barely had good days anymore, but I thought maybe seeing Marcus would bring him some comfort. Marcus arrived on a Friday evening. I'd warned him about what to expect, but I could see the shock on his face when he saw Daniel. My husband looked older than his 41 years, his face slack, his eyes distant. He was sitting in his favorite chair, staring at the television without really watching it. Danny, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Hey, buddy.
It's me.
It's Marcus. Daniel looked up at him slowly. There was no recognition in his eyes at first. Then, gradually, something seemed to dawn on his face. Marcus, he said uncertainly. Yeah, it's me. Marcus knelt beside the chair. How are you doing? Daniel's face crumpled. I don't know, he said. I don't know what's happening to me. Marcus stayed for the weekend. We talked late into both nights after Daniel went to bed, Marcus asking questions I didn't have good answers for. How bad was it? What did the doctors say? How was I holding up? I found myself breaking down in a way I hadn't in front of anyone else, crying into my wine while Marcus held my hand across the table. On Sunday morning, I woke up early and went downstairs to make coffee. I found Marcus already in the kitchen, staring at something on his phone with a puzzled expression. Everything okay? I asked. He looked up at me, then hesitated. This is going to sound weird, but I got up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m, and I could have sworn I heard someone moving around down here. My stomach tightened. Daniel wanders sometimes. He gets confused. Yeah, I figured. But Claire... He showed me his phone. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I was scrolling through stuff, and I heard him. Talking to someone. Talking to who? I don't know. That's the thing. I was about to get up and check, but then it stopped. And when I looked in on him just now before coming down, he was asleep in bed. I felt cold. Maybe you imagined it? Or maybe it was the TV? Maybe, Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. After Marcus left, I couldn't shake what he'd said. Daniel talking to someone in the middle of the night? It didn't make sense. He barely spoke in complete sentences anymore, unless he'd been talking in his sleep, or confused, having some kind of episode. There were lots of rational explanations. But that night, I lay awake listening. And around 2:30 in the morning, I heard it. The creak of the stairs. The soft sound of footsteps moving through the house below. I got up carefully, my heart pounding. I went to the hallway and looked down the stairs. The living room lights were off, but I could see a glow from the kitchen. And I could hear Daniel's voice, low and steady, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I started down the stairs as quietly as I could. The third step creaked, and immediately the voice stopped. By the time I reached the kitchen, Daniel was standing by the refrigerator with the door open, looking confused and disoriented. "Daniel," I said, "what are you doing?" He turned to me, squinting in the light. I don't know. I was hungry. "Who were you talking to?" "Talking." He looked genuinely puzzled. I wasn't talking to anyone. But I'd heard him. I knew I'd heard him. "Come back to bed," I said, taking his arm. "It's the middle of the night." He let me guide him back upstairs, compliant and confused. But as I lay beside him in the darkness afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. That voice hadn't sounded confused or disoriented. It had sounded clear. Normal. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. The stress of the past 3 years was breaking me down, making me paranoid, making me see and hear things that weren't there. I was becoming as confused as Daniel was supposed to be. Or something else was happening. Something I didn't want to let myself consider. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention, really watching Daniel in a way I hadn't before. And the more I watched, the more inconsistencies I noticed. The way he'd seem utterly helpless with his morning routine, then I'd catch a glimpse of him moving with perfect coordination when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he'd stare blankly at the TV for hours, but the remote would somehow end up in different positions, suggesting he'd been changing channels. The way food would go missing from the kitchen, yet he'd claim he hadn't eaten, couldn't remember how to prepare food. Little things. Tiny things. Things that could all be explained away individually, but taken together formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I started keeping a notebook documenting everything. Times and dates and descriptions of behaviors that didn't fit. I felt crazy doing it, like I was building a case against my own sick husband. But I needed to make sense of what I was seeing or confirm that I was seeing nothing at all. In March 2020, the world shut down. The pandemic hit, and suddenly we were isolated in a way that felt both new and horribly familiar. The adult daycare program closed. The home health aide stopped coming. It was just Daniel and me, trapped together in the house day after day. I should have felt overwhelmed, but part of me was almost relieved. Now I could watch him all the time. Now I could figure out what was real. The first thing I noticed was that his symptoms seemed to stabilize. No better, but no worse either. Dr. Kemper switched to telemedicine appointments, and over video calls, Daniel performed exactly as expected, confused, struggling with simple questions, unable to remember basic information. But between appointments, when it was just us, I kept catching those small moments of clarity that vanished the instant he realized I was watching. In May, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. I was going to install a camera. The idea had been growing in my mind for weeks, and I kept pushing it away, horrified by what it implied. That I suspected my sick husband of. What? Faking his illness? The idea was absurd.
Impossible.
But I couldn't shake it, and I needed to know. I needed to either confirm my suspicions or prove myself wrong, so I could let this poisonous doubt go and just be his caretaker again. I ordered a small camera online, one advertised as a nanny cam. It looked like a simple digital clock. I told myself I was doing this for Daniel's safety, to monitor him when I couldn't be in the room. That was almost true. When it arrived, I set it up on the bookshelf in the living room angled toward Daniel's favorite chair and the doorway to the kitchen. The camera fed to an app on my phone, recording continuously and saving the footage to a cloud server. Then I waited. For the first few days, nothing unusual appeared in the recordings. Daniel sat in his chair, dozed, stared at the television. He moved slowly, uncertainly, exactly like a man with advanced dementia. I felt foolish for my suspicions, ashamed. Then, on the fourth day, I had to run to the pharmacy to pick up Daniel's prescriptions. I was gone for about 45 minutes. When I got home, Daniel was in his chair, looking blank and tired as usual. I made dinner, and we ate in near silence as we did most nights now. After Daniel went to bed, I sat down with my phone and pulled up the camera footage from while I'd been gone. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. Daniel sitting, staring into space. Then, about 5 minutes after I'd left, he stood up. Not the slow, uncertain way he usually moved, but smoothly, easily. He walked to the window and looked out, presumably checking that I was really gone. Then he turned and walked into the kitchen, moving with perfect coordination. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I watched as he opened the refrigerator and took out leftovers from the night before. I watched as he heated them in the microwave, punching the buttons with no hesitation. I watched as he ate, scrolling through his phone with his other hand, his face alert and focused. When he was done, he washed his plate, put it away, and checked the window again. Then he returned to his chair and arranged himself back into that slack, vacant posture. All of this took maybe 20 minutes. By the time I'd gotten home, he was the Daniel I knew. Confused. Helpless. Sick. Except he wasn't sick at all. I sat there on the couch with my phone in my hands, feeling like I was falling through space. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. There had to be another explanation. Some kind of temporary lucidity, maybe that he didn't remember afterward. That happened with dementia, didn't it? Brief windows of clarity. But he'd looked so deliberate, so aware. And the way he'd checked the window, the way he'd positioned himself back in the chair before I returned, it felt calculated. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to his breathing, feeling like I was lying next to a stranger. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake with my heart racing. The next morning, I made breakfast for both of us. Daniel sat at the table, looking confused when I put the plate in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Breakfast," I said. "Scrambled eggs. You used to love them." He poked at the eggs with his fork, that uncertain expression on his face. Did I? I sat across from him and watched him struggle with the fork, taking small, clumsy bites. Was he really struggling? Or was this an act? I couldn't tell anymore. The ground had shifted beneath me, and I didn't know what was real. Over the next week, I watched the footage religiously. And once I knew what to look for, I saw it everywhere. Daniel would wait for me to leave the house or go upstairs or take a shower. Then he'd drop the act. He'd move normally, eat normally, use his phone with perfect facility. Once, I watched him sit at the kitchen table with a laptop I didn't even know he still had, typing steadily for nearly an hour. When I was present, he was confused and helpless. When he thought he was alone, he was completely fine. The realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, until there was no way to deny it anymore. Daniel was faking everything. The Alzheimer's, the confusion, the decline, all of it was an act. An elaborate, sustained performance that he'd been maintaining for years. And I'd given up my job, my savings, my entire life to take care of him. I kept watching the footage. I needed to understand the full scope of what he was doing. And the more I watched, the worse it got. He wasn't just faking his symptoms. He was using his illness to control me, to keep me home, dependent, isolated. To avoid working, avoid responsibilities, avoid having to be a full partner in our marriage. I watched him order things online when I was out: clothes, electronics, games. Things that were being delivered to a P.O. box I didn't know about. I watched him talk on the phone in that normal, steady voice, having conversations I couldn't hear. I watched him laugh at something on his laptop, a genuine laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. And through all of it, the moment he heard me coming, he'd snap back into character. The confused, helpless patient who needed me for everything. The betrayal was so huge, so complete, that I couldn't fully process it. This man I'd loved, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, had been lying to me every single day for years. Every moment of tenderness I'd shown him, every time I'd helped him with something he claimed he couldn't do, every time I'd cried over what we were losing, it had all been a lie. I kept going through my days on autopilot, playing my role as caretaker while trying to figure out what to do. I felt numb, hollowed out. Sometimes I'd look at Daniel and feel nothing at all. Other times I'd feel rage, so intense it scared me. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Daniel had a diagnosis from a respected neurologist. He'd been seeing specialists for years. He'd undergone tests, brain scans. His symptoms matched the expected progression of early-onset Alzheimer's. If I went to Dr. Kemper and said my husband was faking, he'd think I was having a breakdown. If I told our friends, the few who still kept in touch, they'd think the stress had driven me crazy. Even Marcus wouldn't believe me. I'd seen the way he'd looked at Daniel during his visit, the heartbreak and pity in his eyes. No one would believe that someone could fake a degenerative brain disease for years, that someone would put their spouse through that kind of hell for no apparent reason. But I had proof now. I had the footage. Except I couldn't show it to anyone without admitting I'd been secretly recording my supposedly disabled husband. That made me look paranoid, controlling, suspicious of a sick man. It would reflect badly on me, not him. I was trapped. In late June, something happened that made everything exponentially worse. I had to go to the dentist for an emergency appointment. A crown had come loose. Daniel couldn't come with me, obviously, so I left him home. I was gone for about 2 hours. When I checked the footage later that night, I saw him do his usual routine. Wait for me to leave, drop the act, move around normally. But this time, about 30 minutes into my absence, the doorbell rang. Daniel went to answer it, and a woman walked in. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was carrying a large bag. Daniel greeted her with a smile and a hug that looked familiar, comfortable. They sat on the couch together, the couch where I spent my evenings watching TV beside my sick husband, and talked. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was intimate. Easy. At one point, she put her hand on his knee, and he covered it with his own. My stomach turned over. After about 20 minutes, they got up and went upstairs, out of the camera's view. They were up there for the rest of the time I was gone. When they came back down, the woman kissed him goodbye. Not a peck.
آره الکیش.
Then she left, and Daniel straightened up the couch cushions, checked his watch, and returned to his chair to resume his act. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. When I came out, Daniel was sitting in his chair, looking vague and confused as always. I stood in the doorway, looking at him, and felt something crack inside me. "How are you feeling?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked up at me with those empty eyes.
Tired, he said.
"I think I slept while you were gone. Did you have any visitors?" "Visitors?" He frowned, like the concept was confusing. No visitors. Just you and me." I nodded. "Just you and me." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in the darkness, inches away from Daniel, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I had to confront him. I knew that. But I was terrified. Not of him hurting me physically. I'd never been afraid of that. But of what the confrontation would mean. The end of my marriage. The end of the life I'd thought we were building together, even under the shadow of illness. And if I confronted him, he'd just deny it. He'd say I was stressed, imagining things that the footage showed nothing unusual. Maybe he'd even suggest I was the one who needed help. Gaslighting on top of everything else.
I needed to be smart about this. Strategic.
I needed more evidence, more proof, enough that he couldn't talk his way out of it. So I installed 2 more cameras. One in the bedroom, hidden inside a picture frame on the dresser. One in the kitchen, tucked into a corner cabinet with a clear view of the table and counters. Then I engineered opportunities to leave the house. I told Daniel I needed to run errands, go to appointments, see friends. I'd never been away from him this much since his diagnosis, but he didn't object. If anything, he seemed pleased to have the time alone. The footage I collected over the next 2 weeks painted a complete picture of his deception. When I was gone, Daniel lived a normal life. He cooked elaborate meals. He worked out following exercise videos on the laptop. He talked on the phone for hours to the woman, to other people I didn't recognize. He read books, watched movies, played video games. He was productive, active, engaged. When I was home, he was barely functional. The woman came over 3 more times. From their conversations, I'd positioned one of the cameras close enough to pick up audio. I learned her name was Amber. She worked at a dental office, which was either a coincidence or explained how Daniel had known I'd be gone that first day. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been taking care of him, grieving the loss of my husband, watching my life fall apart, he'd been having an affair. I also discovered why he was doing this. Or at least part of why. In one conversation between Daniel and Amber that I recorded, he talked about how the sick routine was perfect. No one expected anything from him. He didn't have to work, didn't have to pretend to care about his career. He got to stay home, do whatever he wanted, while I supported us on what was left of our savings and my unemployment benefits. Doesn't it bother you? Amber asked. Lying to her like that? She's so gullible, Daniel said, and he laughed. Actually laughed. She believes everything. I could probably tell her I've forgotten my own name, and she'd just sadly accept it. When are you going to end it?
Soon.
Once the money runs out, I'll probably have a miraculous decline and end up in a care facility. Then she can divorce me or whatever, and I'll move in with you. What about the house? In her name.
She can keep it.
I don't care. I listened to this through my phone earbuds, sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot, and felt everything I'd been holding together start to shatter. This wasn't just about faking an illness. This was a calculated plan to drain me financially and emotionally, to use me until I had nothing left to give, then discard me. And he thought it was funny. I sat in that car for a long time, crying so hard I thought I might be sick again. People walked past, loading their groceries, living their normal lives, and I sat there with the ruins of mine scattered around me. When I finally felt like I could drive, I went home. Daniel was in his chair, looking blank and helpless as always. Claire, he said when I came in, his voice uncertain. Did you go somewhere? Yes, I said. I went grocery shopping.
Oh.
That's nice. He smiled vaguely. Did you get anything good? I set the bags on the kitchen counter and looked at him. This man I'd loved. This stranger wearing my husband's face. I need to ask you something, I said. He tilted his head. Okay. Are you really sick? Something flickered in his eyes. Just for a second. Then it was gone, replaced by confusion. What do you mean? You know I'm sick. The doctors said. I know what the doctors said. But I'm asking you, are you really sick? Claire, why would you? He shook his head. I don't understand. Of course I'm sick. You've been taking care of me for years. You know how bad it is. Then who's Amber? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched him process the question, saw him trying to figure out how much I knew, how he should respond. I don't know an Amber, he finally said, his voice cautious. Yes, you do. She comes over when I'm gone. You've been seeing her for 8 months. Claire, I don't. He stood up, moving with that same uncertain shuffle he always used around me. I think you're confused. Maybe you need to sit down. I'm not confused. I have proof. That stopped him. Proof. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I selected the footage from his most recent conversation with Amber and held it out to him.
He didn't take it.
He stood there, staring at the screen, watching himself move normally, talk normally, kiss another woman. When the clip ended, I lowered the phone. We looked at each other across the living room, and I saw the calculation happening in his eyes. He was trying to figure out how to explain this away, how to turn this around on me. You've been recording me, he said, and his voice had changed. It wasn't confused or uncertain anymore. It was sharp.
Angry.
You put cameras in our house without telling me? You've been faking a terminal illness for 3 years. Don't talk to me about trust. I'm not faking anything. I am sick. You saw the diagnosis. You were there for all the tests. The tests that you somehow passed well enough to get diagnosed? The symptoms you conveniently display only when I'm around. You're being paranoid. The stress has gotten to you, Claire. Maybe you need to see someone. And there it was. Gaslighting. Making me doubt my own perception of reality, suggesting I was the unstable one. I have hours of footage, I said, my voice shaking now. Hours of you moving normally, talking normally, living a completely normal life when you think I'm not watching. You're not sick. You've been lying to me this entire time. He was quiet for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted. The mask finally completely dropped. So what? He said. What are you going to do about it? The casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. What am I going to do? I repeated.
Yeah.
You going to tell Dr. Kemper? Show him your secret recordings of your disabled husband? Tell everyone you've been spying on me? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. They'll think you've had a breakdown, that you've been looking for an excuse to abandon me now that things are hard. They'll believe the evidence. Will they? I've been seeing that neurologist for 3 years. I have brain scans, test results, a documented progression of symptoms. I've got a disability claim with the insurance company. I've convinced every single person in our lives that I'm sick. He took a step toward me. You've got some footage that shows me having lucid moments, which dementia patients have all the time. That's all you've got. You told Amber you were faking. I recorded that conversation. Conversations taken out of context can mean anything. Maybe I was joking. Maybe I was confused. Maybe I was having a delusional episode where I thought I was fine. He shrugged. There are lots of explanations that don't make me the villain here. I felt like I couldn't breathe, because he was right. He'd built this lie so carefully, so thoroughly, that even with proof, I might not be able to convince anyone. Why? I asked, and my voice broke. Why would you do this to me? Because I was tired, he said simply. Tired of working, tired of pretending to care about a career I hated, tired of being responsible for everything. You were always so capable, so independent. I knew you could handle it. Handle what? Giving up my job? Watching you disappear? Spending all our money on treatments and care? You wanted to feel needed. I gave you that. You're welcome. The words were so monstrous, so completely detached from any normal human empathy that I couldn't even respond. I just stood there, staring at this person I'd spent years caring for, and felt nothing but horror. I want a divorce, I finally said. Fine by me, but you're not getting the house. It's in your name, you pay for it. And good luck finding a judge who won't sympathize with the poor disabled man whose wife abandoned him. He smiled. I've been setting this up for years, Claire. You can't win. You're a sociopath. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just smarter than you. He walked toward the stairs. I'm going to bed. We can talk about lawyers in the morning. He went upstairs, moving with perfect, healthy coordination, leaving me standing in the wreckage of our life together. I sat down on the couch and cried until I had nothing left. The next morning, I called Marcus. I needed someone who knew Daniel, who'd seen him during this illness, who might possibly believe me. He answered on the third ring. Claire, is everything okay? No, I said. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Okay. He sounded worried. I told him everything. The inconsistencies I'd noticed, the cameras, the footage, the conversation with Amber, Daniel's confession the night before. I sent him video files as we talked, letting him see the proof with his own eyes. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus. I believe you, he said finally. I started crying again, this time with relief. You do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to believe it. It's insane. But after I visited back in January, I kept thinking about that night when I heard him talking. And some things you said in your emails over the past year or so, they bothered me. The way his symptoms didn't quite match what I knew about Alzheimer's. But I thought I was just looking for reasons to hope, you know? What do I do? I asked. He said, even with proof, no one will believe me.
He might be right about that.
But Claire, you can't stay there. Whether you can prove he was faking or not, you know the truth now. You have to leave. Where would I go? I don't have any money.
I don't have a job.
I gave up everything for him. Come stay with me. I have room. You can figure out the rest after you get out of there. Marcus. I'm serious. Pack a bag and get on a plane. I'll buy the ticket right now. I looked around the living room of the house I'd thought would be our forever home. The chair where Daniel had sat pretending to be lost while I grieved. The couch where he'd kissed another woman. The life I'd built on lies. Okay, I said. Okay. I packed quickly, throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. Daniel was still asleep upstairs, or pretending to be. I didn't care which. Before I left, I did one more thing. I called Dr. Kemper's office and asked to speak with him directly. His assistant tried to redirect me to a nurse, but I insisted it was urgent. When he came on the line, I said, Dr. Kemper, this is Claire Whitmore. I need to tell you something about Daniel's condition. Of course. What's going on? He's been faking it. All of it. The Alzheimer's, the symptoms, everything. I have proof. There was a pause. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand this has been incredibly difficult for you. Many caregivers experience burnout, and it's not uncommon to have complicated feelings about. I'm not burned out. I have video footage of him functioning normally when he thinks no one is watching. He confessed to me last night. He's been lying to both of us for 3 years. Another pause, longer this time. That would be extremely unlikely. The tests we ran were extensive. His brain scans showed abnormalities consistent with early-onset Alzheimer's. What kind of abnormalities? Reduced hippocampal volume, cortical thinning in the temporal and parietal lobes. Is it possible those things could be caused by something other than Alzheimer's? Well, yes, there are other conditions that can present similarly, but given his cognitive symptoms. His symptoms that he displayed during appointments, that he could have been faking. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't think you understand how difficult it would be to fake the specific deficits he showed in our assessments. The pattern recognition tasks, the memory tests, the spatial reasoning. What if he failed those tests on purpose? Silence. Dr. Kemper, I know how this sounds, but I'm telling you, I have proof that he's been acting. And I think you should consider the possibility that his brain scans showed pre-existing conditions that he then used as cover to fake progressive symptoms. I would need to see this proof you're referring to. I'll send it to you. Just please keep an open mind. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the house for a few minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then I started the engine and drove away. I spent the flight to Seattle staring out the window, numb and exhausted. Marcus picked me up at the airport, and the look on his face when he saw me, concern and anger and sadness all mixed together, almost broke me again. Come on, he said, taking my suitcase. Let's get you home. His apartment was small but comfortable. He set me up in the guest room and made dinner while I sat on his couch, still feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together. Marcus lent me money to retain a lawyer. I sent all the footage to Dr. Kemper as promised. I called a few friends I had left and told them what had happened, bracing for disbelief, but receiving support instead. Daniel didn't call or text. He simply moved Amber into the house, from what I heard later. Dr. Kemper called me a week after I'd left. Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed the footage you sent. And I agree that it raises serious questions about Daniel's diagnosis. I'd like to schedule another evaluation, this time with a colleague who specializes in factitious disorders. Would Daniel be willing to come in? I doubt it. Unfortunately, without his cooperation, there's not much I can do from a medical standpoint. But I will be amending his file to note concerns about the validity of his symptoms. And I'll be reporting this to his disability insurance carrier.
Thank you, I said.
That's more than I expected. The divorce was ugly. Daniel fought me on everything, just like he'd promised. But his disability claim fell apart after Dr. Kemper's report, and when the insurance company investigated and found evidence of his affair, they denied his benefits and demanded repayment of what he'd already received. He couldn't keep up the act after that. Too many people were watching now. He ended up settling the divorce quickly, probably to avoid further scrutiny. I got the house, what was left of our savings, and my life back. But it took time to rebuild. I'd lost 3 years to his lie, and I'd lost something else too, a baseline trust in my own judgment. If I could be fooled that completely for that long, what else might I be wrong about? Therapy helped. So did Marcus, who let me stay with him for 6 months while I got back on my feet. I eventually found a new job, not at my old level, but working my way back up. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. I still think about those years sometimes. The nights I spent lying awake worried about him. The times I helped him with basic tasks, believing he couldn't do them himself. The moments of tenderness I showed him while he was laughing at how gullible I was. The betrayal was total. Not just that he'd lied, but that he'd watched me sacrifice everything and felt nothing but contempt. But I survived it. I survived him. And now, when I lie in bed at night, I'm alone, but I'm free. And that's worth more than the false comfort of a lie, no matter how well constructed. I'll never get back those 3 years, but I'll never waste another day on someone who doesn't deserve my trust. That's the thing about the truth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you know who someone really is, you can't unknow it. Daniel taught me that. It's the only honest thing he ever did.